It's Gun Week. Now, the Founding Fathers understood that only an armed people could truly be a free people. So this week, I invite you to join me and Mug Club's resident gun aficionado, Mr. Mrgunsngear, as we tackle the subject of firearms from every angle possible. In today's episode, let's examine and debunk some of the most egregious technical myths regarding firearms and how they've become so pervasive. It's the 4th of July, and firearms are as American as, I guess, the American flag. They're very American. You know what? I think that's a good thing. You can hit the like button if you like the fact that the United States fought off the world's greatest superpower one century, only to become the world's only superpower the next century for all of its flaws. And this is installment number 2 of most common gun myths that you hear. We wanted to separate them into 2 categories because we have Mr. Mrgunsngear here. Highly recommend that you go check out his channel, check out his content. He knows. He's forgotten more about firearms than I'll ever know, I think is the expression. It's been a long day. I'm good with it. And I'm distracted by his chromedomia. The shine. Do you have to well, you don't know. We put on some powder. We did. You don't wear sunscreen. I don't. You refuse to wear sunscreen. I do. When we were out at the range, if you went and watched the ballistics video, we were all delirious because we had lost probably about 10 pounds of water that day. Yeah. It was hot. It was legit hot. Well, you're surrounded by burning tires in a valley in Texas. No wind. So we wanted to specifically get into now more the technical myths that you may hear about firearms, as opposed to sort of constitutional myths that you might hear or lack therein as far as constitutional application. This is more what you might hear about firearms that might scare you away from guns in general. We'll do 7, maybe plus 1 in there. Myth number 7 that you've probably heard quite a bit and run into is the AR-15 is a weapon of war that was intended only for military use.
They issued the following statement. They said, our father, Eugene Stoner, designed the AR-15 and subsequent M16 as a military weapon to give our soldiers an advantage over the AK-47. He died long before any mass shootings occurred, but we do think he would have been horrified and sickened as anyone, if not more so, by these events. And they went on to tell me that he personally, although he was an avid shooter and an outdoorsman, never owned the AR-15, his key invention. He never used it for personal defense.
I've held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving. And the bullet that is utilized, a 50 caliber, these kinds of bullets, need to be licensed and do not need to be on the streets.
The truth, Mr. Gear.
The AR-15 is a derivative of the AR-10, which was designed first. Military contracts were awarded for that. To Cuba, Sudan, as well as others. But then the AR-15 was labeled commercially the Colt Sporter. So that was available to civilians. Right. And then, of course, the M16, and there were some early variants as well, led into the M16A1 that was adopted by the Army.
Right. Yeah. It was the M16 was basically available it was being pushed for a military contract, and the AR-15 was simultaneously being pushed as a civilian firearm for sporting or hunting. Right,
and initially they had much more success with civilian sales than they did the military. The Air Force adopted what we would consider, a M16 prior to the Army, but very small numbers. So for years, the majority of AR-15s being made were going to the civilian market only.
Right. Well, I think that one is... we consider that myth cooked. And by the way, a reason that they're so popular, we'll get into this more later on, is that AR-15s are they're popular because they're versatile, they're easy to handle. You can go back to Long Guns 101. There's a reason that they are popular, and it's not because they should be used only by Navy SEALs as a scary black rifle. It's because it's very easy for people who are inexperienced shooters to handle. And hey, that's important if people are trying to get a firearm that is controllable for them.
Especially when we're trying to bring new folks into the community, right? Something that's lightweight, easy to shoot well, easy to hit what you're aiming at. Right. It's the perfect weapon for a lot of scenarios.
I've never had anyone shoot an AR-15 who was a new shooter and not find it one of the easiest firearms to shoot. Once they get past the sound.
Agreed.
But that's any rifle like that that's firing around that quickly.
Especially when you compare it to a shotgun that Joe Biden's recommending.
Yes.
You don't need an AR-15. It's harder to aim, it's harder to use, and in fact, you don't need 30 rounds to protect yourself. Buy a shotgun.
I mean, in all seriousness, for a new shooter to be able to efficiently handle a shotgun is difficult.
Right.
Not so with the AR-15.
Well, it's just a rule of kinetic energy that
Correct.
people understand. Like, I haven't fired many double-barrel shotguns, but I fired pump shotguns, and that alone is far more recoiling than, for example, a semi-automatic shotgun, because part of that energy is used to cycle the next round.
Right, or even a pump-action shotgun. The biggest malfunction, or the most common malfunction people have, is called short shucking, where essentially they don't run the action hard enough.
Right.
You have to do that after every round. AR-15, you don't.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things. Every single woman I've taken goes, wow, that is surprisingly easy to shoot.
Yep.
Because they're thinking, well, I guess they believe what they've been told, that
Correct.
it's this unbelievable, unwieldy rifle, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Which brings us to another, this one's a fun myth. You were laughing when we were going over this. Myth number 6. I don't know how common it is, but I have run into people who believe it, and we certainly know that former Vice President Biden believes it. The myth is that 9mm blows the lung out of the body.
A 9mm bullet blows the lung out of the body.
Okay, here's the truth. No.
No, it's simply not true.
Yes, I mean, we'll get into it more, but incorrect.
Yes.
Completely. But okay, I should clarify. It would be possible for maybe a portion of one's lung to be carried. I mean, if it's like if two babies get into a gunfight, that might be possible.
Right.
But a grown adult, the idea that a 9mm would blow a lung out of a body, this is someone, again, who it's either gross incompetence or it is absolute dishonesty.
I'll give you concrete evidence for that. Tupac was shot in the lung and had to have it surgically removed afterwards. And he was shot with a 9mm.
Really?
Yes. So his lung was still in his body and had to be removed afterwards.
Well,
so there you go.
If Joe Biden was right, they could have skipped a step.
Indeed. It would have already been out.
Well, and here's something else, too, that I think you should know about. Look, the 9mm, as a matter of fact, so 9mm has become ubiquitous, it's become far more popular. Would we say that it sort of took the place of other calibers after the famous Miami shootout?
The 1986 Miami shootout, yeah.
1986 Miami shootout, where before that, police officers were often carrying either revolvers, often in .357, right, or they would carry often the Colt 1911s, variants therein, which would be .45.
Correct.
Now, to be clear, both a .357 Magnum and a .45 ACP are people will argue but okay, on paper, significantly more powerful rounds.
.357 for sure.
For sure.
It's inarguable.
And .45, obviously, people will say with modern ballistics, it's more comparable, but it's a much heavier bullet traveling.
Correct.
Historically, .45, .357, these are seen as more powerful rounds. 9mm sort of became the round of choice because it is effective enough while still being controllable and can be in a package that would be that could include a capacity like, for example, a Glock, a Walther. Some of the modern firearms, SIG just got a military contract. My preference is Walther. Thanks to them for sponsoring the studio, where you have something that's controllable, effective enough, kind of minimum effective dose.
Right. And it also has minimal recoil as well.
Yes.
So you can get your follow-up shots faster. So with handguns, we talked about incapacitation in the previous video, and with handguns, you don't want to count on a one-shot stop because it's highly unlikely. You want to put as many rounds on target as quickly as possible until the threat stops, essentially. Right. So 9mm allows you to do that easier than the other cartridges simply because they have more recoil. Right.
And I think this seems like remedial. I know we'll have people in the... And believe me, I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate you. If you're a firearm enthusiast, going, everyone knows that 9mm doesn't blow. But not everybody knows that. A lot of people have only heard 9mm referred to in, hip-hop songs about violence, and they hear 9mm and they think that it's this show stuff. I mean, I played GoldenEye as a kid. I thought that the Golden Gun, which I think was just a Luger, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure.
I don't know, but I thought that was the most powerful gun in existence.
Right. And unfortunately, in a lot of other countries as well, 9mm is banned because it's a quote-unquote military cartridge. So a lot of people have that perception as well. Like there's a lot of countries that 380 is very popular for civilian use because 9mm is banned. And I'll get them in my comments saying, oh, 9mm is so much more powerful than other rounds. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But that's where it comes from.
You'll run into people like that. They'll say, no one needs an AR-15. Or they'll say, I've heard people say, no one needs a 9mm.
Right.
Just get a shot. Do you have any idea how much more lethal buckshot is from a 12 gauge and a 9mm?
It's not even close. I mean, it's essentially 8 to 9mm at once, almost. They're slightly smaller, but it's pretty darn close.
Right. And so people say, well, it's round. It's not. We get it. The point is, it's like at least a handful of 9mm coming out. This idea that a shotgun is controllable, no. The idea that it's not as lethal at close range, it could very easily be argued it's the most lethal
of common firearms within 25 yards, no doubt.
On a shot-for-shot basis.
Correct. 12 gauge is the most lethal.
Absolutely. It's just that you're most familiar with it. And so they want to keep you disconnected. They want to keep you unfamiliar with it. They want 9mm to be something that's scary off in the distance. Your double barrel or pump shotgun, 12-gauge shotgun, is far more deadly, far more difficult to control, and certainly more scary to a home intruder. So that's why there's nothing wrong with it. If you like your pump shotgun, go ahead and keep it. I don't recommend shooting it into the air.
Yeah. So I think you have to do it off your porch, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
That is the recommended technique. Yes.
Isn't it funny? It's like, hey, hold on a second. When we talk about, these surreptitious recordings, it's like, well, former Vice President Biden advocated a crime.
Literally.
On camera as advice.
It could be multiple crimes, too, depending on where you live, not just firing the gun, but firing it in a residential area.
Yeah, in the air.
Right.
It has to come down.
Yes, it's not the Middle East.
No. And this brings us to another myth, and we did the ballistics video, which you can click the link and go watch that. You hear this a lot. I don't want to throw him under the bus, but even Pops Crowder believed this. When I was young and I grew up, he said, well, you know what, actually, that the 22 will bounce around the skull like a ping pong ball because it's so small. And here's the truth. No. Now, it wouldn't really matter if you didn't have some people. I've had people then follow up with, that's why I carry a 22.
Right.
Because I pointed at their face and it's going to be like just a pinball machine. And you're like, that's not, yeah.
Right. Now, I don't know where it comes from, whether or not it was because the mob like to use silenced 22s for certain hits or something like that. I have no idea, but it's absolutely not true. The 22 performs like every other bullet, just smaller and lighter. But yeah, there's no bouncing around. They can curve, they can yaw, but bounce, no. Yeah, there's no bouncing.
Or sometimes what people will refer to as they can tumble, which means if it goes in, it might do a little bit of this action. I don't know how much you can. I don't have a monitor see on camera where it does a little bit of this, but any bullet can do that.
Correct, and they'll do it more. In fact,
right,
larger calibers.
But a lot of people believe. Let me ask you, and comment below. Did you believe that one? A lot of people did, and then did you ever just go through the basic noggin test where you go, hold on a second, okay. Basically, there's brain. Think of a bunch of Jell-O in your head, right? And some solid, depending. In my case, it's mostly Jell-O. And it's bouncing off a skull, which would be moist. So it's not that much of sort of a ricochet, ricocheting surface. And it would bounce back through Jell-O and, relatively hard matter back again. Of course, it makes no sense and it defies physics, but you have a lot of people who believe it, and that's because of sometimes such an irrational fear of firearms that people choose to believe myths because they don't want to be bothered to do research.
Right.
It's also a funny one.
It is, but it's, yes, completely debunked.
And something else, I guess, that we could probably touch on at this kind of same point in time, the myth that, well, actually, a 22 is the most deadly round. And because at some point in time, there were more deaths from the 22 than other calibers, and that's just because it was the caliber that most people had.
Right. 22 is still extremely popular, and probably, I don't have the data on this, I'm making it up, but up until 2 or 3 decades ago, it was probably the most common caliber in America in terms of firearms owned.
Yeah.
I mean, because everyone gets a 22 to either do like critter maintenance, you have critters around the house that you don't want, or you want to train your kid, or you want to cheaply hunt. And there's a lot of small game that can be hunted effectively with 22. So I know a lot of people I know grew up like literally walking the woods with a 22.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, today I don't know if it would be enough considering that you have people. I mean, there are drag shows for kids. My point is, you have no idea what's lurking around the woods at this point. I'm not so much worried about 4-legged animals. I'm worried about if you see a paneled van, I would say 9mm or higher.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Don't take it that seriously, YouTube. All right. Something else. This came from actually Nancy, and she's a very, very smart woman.
Sure.
But we just sort of compile these from what people here actually believed. And she had heard, this is myth number 4, that the 22 caliber has a lot or a disproportionate number of spontaneous firings, that it's more likely to accidentally discharge. Have you run into this? A lot of people believe in that?
I've heard it. I don't think there's any truth to it at all. The only way that I could think it might have proliferated is that there just was more 22s.
Right.
But other than that, no. 22, for folks that don't know, is a rimfire cartridge. So most of the cartridges we're talking about are center-fired, meaning they have to be struck in the center of the back of the cartridge, whereas 22 doesn't. But I can't see how being a rimfire cartridge would cause a discharge.
Yeah, well, what is true is typically because it's rimfire, right, it's easier to mass produce, and so you end up with significantly lower quality ammo.
That is absolutely true.
So this could maybe be true if in a fit of frustration from having another non-discharging at all 22, which is very common, you smack your piece of crap gun saying fire, and it accidentally discharges.
Yeah, maybe. But that is true. With rimfires, there's a lot of reasons I don't recommend rimfires for self-defense, but that is one of them. They're definitely less reliable in terms of ignition of the powder.
So we were pretty surprised with the ballistics results with that.
We had a 22 that penetrated 16 inches out of a pistol. And
tumbled a little bit.
Yes.
Kind of a surprising wound channel.
Very surprising. So Federal makes a round called Punch 22, which is designed for that very use. And they charge a ton of money for it. Like, it's super expensive, and it performs just like that. So to see that with just common
Did
ammo,
we ever find out what that round was?
No.
I feel like it was very old, like from the 80s or something.
Winchester Super X.
Winchester Super X, we're being told, is what it was. So
we cannot confirm nor deny, just to be clear, but all of us. I think we were like, was that 22 Magnum?
Yeah, it was.
Is that just a basic? Really? Was it like a? I think we said, are these the mini mags or something? And then we were like, no, it's just an old. Someone went, let me check. Like the never-ending story, blew off the dust. It was like, oh no, it's just these.
Yeah.
I don't want to disparage it, but not too impressive, I guess, to people in the know.
There you go.
There you go. Okay, here's a myth that you really wanted to, and you'd think it would be done with the ballistics test that we did. I'd recommend go click that video. And I'm sorry, I love him. He's a great, but Brian Callen believes this one.
Right.
And it's because, and you know this, someone told him, who was former special forces, that part is true. Of course. Said, all you need, and this is myth number 3, all you need for home defense is birdshot.
But I didn't know that if you're defending your home with a shotgun, the formula dictates that you're supposed to buy both boxes. This was not a formula that I was familiar with. It goes like this. The 6 shots in 12-gauge shotgun. So when you load the gun, you load it like this. First shot, bird shot. Next shot, buckshot. Bird shot. And then after that, gun's Jamaican. Buckshot, buckshot, buckshot.
How often do you hear people say that?
All the time, and I'll just go out there on a limb and say, special operators rarely using birdshot.
Right.
It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, people do say it all the time, and one of the things that they recommend it for is a lack of quote-unquote over-penetration for a home defense type scenario, like i.e. you don't want your bullets to go through the walls into your neighbor's house or something like that.
Right.
And to be fair,
I don't want that either.
It's not going to over-penetrate because it's not even going to penetrate.
Yes.
So I think the gel tests we did, the pellets were between 3 and 6 inches total. Like 6 was max, and that wasn't a lot of them. And that's gel tests. You know, you're not even... Keep in mind, like,
the front of it looked like
jacket.
It looked like a sesame seed bagel.
Literally.
Yeah.
Literally. So, yeah. The FBI recommends anywhere between 12 to 18 inches of penetration for reliable, quote-unquote, stops. And, yeah, it's obviously nowhere near that, not even close. And I argue often that if you're talking about penetration and what you actually want for most shooting scenarios, particularly civilian shooting scenarios, i.e. not law enforcement or not military, you want to err on the side of a little bit more penetration than a little bit less. Reasons for that: people are getting fatter, number one. There's that. It's very real. You have to penetrate further to hit the vitals. And then,
gosh, if you look at just now, I'm going to say figuratively, but like half the Victoria's Secret models, that probably wouldn't even feel birdshot.
Right. Literally, it wouldn't reach any of their organs at all.
No.
And it's sad, but it's true.
Yeah. I mean, think about what fat. Have you guys actually seen fat? When they just actually show you fat? We did that in high school. I don't know if they do that.
Yeah,
This is what 5 pounds of fat looks like. This is what 5 pounds of muscle looks like. It's very similar to the ballistics gelatin. The birdshot would very easily get caught in 6 inches of fat.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, so there's just, I highly...
And clothes too.
Right. I was about to say jackets.
Winter clothes.
Heavy jackets, depending on where you live.
Right.
I mean, there's stories of, confirmed stories from the Korean War where the Chinese jackets stopped some of the 30 cal bullets that were being shot by American soldiers.
Yeah.
So that's a 30 caliber bullet. We're not talking about birdshot. You know what I mean? What's birdshot going to do? It's not even, it's not going to get close.
Clear, I hate to do this. No one here is saying that their jackets were bulletproof.
No.
Okay.
No.
What we are saying is that it added complications if they had winter coats. They had those jackets which were very, tightly woven. The weave affects it.
And most of those were M1 carbines, to be clear, which is a not very powerful round for a rifle. And There's distance involved, so the bullets weren't going fast.
Right.
There's factors.
Well, we're not saying it, pew, ha,
right.
ha,
No.
off. What we're saying is it didn't penetrate deep enough to cause the kind of wound that you would need
to cause the soldier to stop.
Cause a soldier to stop. Just because people are going to try.
I know. I shouldn't have brought that up.
No, but I understand exactly what you're talking about. And this is one of those things too. The birdshot. So we have these numbers. We had several portions of the birdshot only going 3 inches.
The majority of it.
Yeah, the majority of it. And from the ballistics video, which I think we're playing for you now, is the average is 6 inches, and then with 12 gauge, when you're talking about buckshot, 21 inches. And so that's a significant difference.
And that's double-aught buckshot, to be clear. So for folks that don't know, double-aught buckshot is relatively large projectiles for shotguns. They make other buckshot loads, like they make number 1 buckshot and then number 4 buckshot as well, which are smaller, but still have that buckshot effect of penetration. So if somebody's looking at that number of average of 21 inches, let's say, and they're like, oh, that's a lot of penetration, I'm not comfortable with it. I recommend going down to either number 1 buckshot. You're going to take, on average, 2 to 3 inches of penetration off. Number 4 will take about another 2 to 3 inches of penetration off and still give you good lethality and not risk what we saw with birdshot.
Why do you think this is so good? This is one that is very common. I can't tell you how many people have said, I just keep birdshot in my shotgun.
It's
because
extremely common.
That's fantastic for home defense.
Yep.
Why do you think it's so common?
I think it's people, number one, not understanding ballistics. There's that.
Yeah.
And then people use it to hunt birds, and the birds die, and they're like, "Oh, that must work well on people," and that's just not the case.
Shot a guy in the face.
In the face.
And he was. I remember when I first heard that, I thought, and I didn't know much about firearms back then, and I've never been bird hunting. I thought, oh, well, I guess that guy's gone. And it was really more of a nuisance.
Right. He was fine.
He apologized for Dick Cheney. He apologized to Dick Cheney.
Correct.
Which I don't know how that happened, but when we were talking about this, we were saying, this myth, we were going, and Ginger Snap, who works with us in research, he said, wait, people say birdshot is, and he's from Kansas. He said, my friend was shot with birdshot, and he can still mostly see out of that eye.
Oh, yeah. There's a video online of a guy breaks into a house, and it's like, unfortunately, it's a woman, shoots him with birdshot. He, at the time, is maybe 5 yards away. He runs towards her, grabs a gun, and hits her in the head with it. So he was completely not impacted by it at all.
And I know what some people say, well, yeah, I bet you don't want to be standing in front of my... No one's saying that we want to be shot with birdshot, but add PCP to the mix, right? Add some kind of a thick coat. And by the way, I do think that with birdshot, a few layers and a thick coat...
Oh, it'll stop it.
Yeah,
it will.
Which would stop it. I mean, I used to cheat in paintball, where we would put on more so that it wouldn't hurt, so you'd feel invincible. Obviously, paintball is not as severe as birdshot, but it's not even close, just to be clear. This is a very pervasive myth. Birdshot is not an adequate choice for home defense. If you disagree, please comment below, and hit like if you don't like that people disagree.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you disagree, well, then you're wrong.
Yes, you're wrong. To be clear, there's room to, for example, we were talking about 380.
Yeah.
Now, some people argue, and I understand why they're both sides of this, with modern ammunition, that you can get a 380 in a hollow point that can penetrate deeply enough to effectively expand. But historically, there was a strong case to be made, and some still can make it with 380, that using ball ammo, meaning basic ammo that is not a hollow point, is a better idea because you run the risk of underpenetration.
Yep.
There are discussions like that I think both sides have valid points. There is nothing valid about birdshot for home defense.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Unless you're being attacked by Canadian geese, and that does happen.
It actually happens where I live a lot.
Yeah.
Yes. One of my neighbor's kids was actually mauled by a Canadian goose.
That's a horrible way to go.
Yeah. He's alive, okay. But he had to have a bunch of plastic surgery on his face.
Well, you know,
it was sad.
Yeah, because they grab you. They grab.
Yes.
And they shake.
Yep.
That's the thing. It's people think, well, they don't have teeth, but it's like a vice grip, and then they shake.
Yeah, his son was about 2. It was not good.
And you know what's horrible with it? Joe Lewis is even afraid of them. My dog. One time he was running. We were at a lake in Oklahoma, and he was running. There were 3 Canadian geese, and he just kind of ran up, and then they all just spread their wings. He was like, I didn't even want to anyway, and he just ran off. But he saved face. Yeah.
Right. I'm good.
Yeah. So keep one rifle for the Canadian geese. They're not endangered. I don't care.
Think so.
Shoot the Canadian geese. But it's something else for non-geese related miscreants.
Peter's gonna love that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care. And don't get me started on the burrowing owl. Oh gosh, you spend time in Florida. You know exactly.
Yes, I do.
All right. This brings us to myth number 2. While we're on shotguns, that you don't need to aim them.
So Jill, if there's ever a problem, just walk out on the balcony here, or walk out, put that double-barrel shotgun, and fire 2 blasts outside the house. I promise you, who's ever coming in is not going to. You don't need an AR-15. It's harder to aim, it's harder to use, and in fact, you don't need 30 rounds to protect yourself. Buy a shotgun. Buy a shotgun.
There you go. Just, I mean, first off, that doesn't even really necessarily apply, the Biden clip applying here. It's just funny. So we want to roll again. But, you know, because if you're firing in the air, you wouldn't be aiming at anything.
Right.
Maybe the voice is in your head. but if you are actually dealing with an attacker, people say aim it in the general vicinity. And I've heard this a lot. Yep. And it's fine. Do it from the hip, right? You hear that like the old lady in Bugs Bunny.
Or just point it down the hallway.
Right. Yes, exactly. The truth
is, really depends on the load you're using and the type of shotgun, but as a general rule, sort of a baseline to go off of, buckshot is going to expand in terms of the group pattern at about 1 inch for every yard.
Right.
Now you can change that with different chokes. You can change it with different ammunition that's designed to spread less or spread more. But with it's called a cylinder bore, which is like your standard Remington 870 home defense gun has. With that, you can expect a spread of about 1 inch at every yard, which means at 10 yards, which is pretty far for a home defense shooting.
For a home defense, it'd be pretty far. I mean, if you live in the house in The Shining.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's this much on your chest, right? And that's at 10 yards. So you definitely have to aim.
Yeah. Not only would you have to aim, but again, if you're talking about the risk of, walls, obviously, you'd want to, some could argue you'd want to be more accurate to make sure that you're not off center. But this idea that it's going to be, you remember when in the old Bugs Bunny, I don't know how many times I've referenced Bugs Bunny, the old cartoons was like the bees would turn into one big giant bee. And
and come at you
they
once.
think that that's what a shotgun is, like at 5 yards, it's a stop sign of death. And it's not even close.
And honestly, you don't want it to be.
No.
So for lethality, you want them to be closer together for sure. That's why, as I mentioned, a lot of people will add chokes, and a choke basically is just a screw-in device that screws into the end of your barrel, and it forces the rounds to come together as they exit, so that way they stay in a tighter pattern.
Right.
So a lot of people use that for that very reason, to keep them tighter, because a lot of cases that's what you want. Home defense, I would argue that's what you want.
Now, to be fair, going back to the birdshot, which we hate, aside from for Canadian geese, that's a much wider spread.
It is.
Because there's so many projectiles.
Correct. But again, it also depends on the choke as well.
Right, it depends. But a typical birdshot, let's say at 10 yards compared to
will
buckshot,
spread more. Yes.
That would be, I mean, if buckshot, let's say, would this be about fair for buckshot, like you were saying, something like that?
Maybe a little bit more.
At 10 yards? What would birdshot?
Yeah, you're going to add about...
Might be a stop sign.
About a third, I'd say. 33% at least.
Yeah.
But again, it varies a lot by the round you're using. But it definitely, all things being equal, which they never are, birdshot will spread more.
It doesn't matter, though, because it's still just birdshot.
Correct.
Who cares about that? Oh, you know what? I guess... Oh, okay. We do have a +1 in here.
All right.
But first, before that, the number one, and this is one... Look... Thanks to everyone who served their country, to be clear. Okay? We appreciate it. You are more of a man or woman than myself. I mean, I was raised in Canada, so I couldn't really serve here. But thank you. However, this myth that we hear quite a bit is that, oh, MIL-SPEC means it's the best, or MIL-SPEC means it's superior, where sometimes it's just used as a marketing term.
Correct. It's used as a marketing term, but it's also a baseline standard.
Exactly.
That's really what it is for military weapons. And a lot of folks, like competitive shooters, for example, that have these $3,000 race guns, they're always like, don't call my gun MIL-SPEC. That's trash. Like, they get offended. But yeah, MIL-SPEC is literally what it says. It's the military specification for a given item.
Right.
So on the AR-15, it's the specification for the barrel. It's the specification for the receiver. It's the specification for the stock, etc. So that's what MIL-SPEC means. Now, it can be a good baseline if you don't know anything and you buy something that's MIL-SPEC, quote unquote. You know, at least it's been tested to a certain standard, right? So I'm not saying MIL-SPEC's bad, but it doesn't mean that it's better than anything for sure. I mean, it definitely doesn't mean that.
You will get some people, again, thank you to everyone who served, but then you'll get sometimes people who are referred to as vet bros, like, no, I only use this MIL-SPEC, and they'll make fun of someone else. You go, well, hold on a second, actually, like you're saying, that's the minimum baseline of quality. But even, by the way, some things that are MIL-SPEC, soldiers, in some cases, especially special forces, they will level up and get something that's better than basic.
I was just about to say that. So a lot of, take the AR-15, for example, a lot of the current changes that are happening with the AR pattern guns in the military are coming from the 3-gun world and the competitive world. Right. So for example, now they're adding longer handguards, free float handguards to enable shooters to basically shoot them better, more proficiently. And those are not MIL-SPEC. But because they're being adopted by units and being tested by units now, for example, the latest one has been the URGI, which is the Upper Receiver Improvement, I believe is what it stands for. But
I had a UTI not that long ago.
Just drink some cranberry. That's what I'm about to say. Yeah. So, but the URGI,
I think it's another big ploy just by Big Ocean Spray.
So, is that a thing?
Yeah,
it's big cranberry.
Yeah, big cranberry.
But the URGI, basically, it's been adopted by lots of military units now, and all of the influence on it has come from competitive shooting, just to make it faster. So the MIL-SPEC is, number one, evolving, and it's evolving because sometimes, not always, there's better than MIL-SPEC. So why not make that the new MIL-SPEC, right?
And what and I don't necessarily know how standardized it is, where sometimes people will slap it, in a magazine ad or sometimes online, where the point is, don't just look for that term and think that you have your bases covered, right? There are some great firearms out there that wouldn't probably just list MIL-SPEC, and there's some not so great firearms that would be marketing themselves and using the term MIL-SPEC. So that's why we wanted to address that, because you will have some people say, hey, I know MIL-SPEC, I also know birdshot. We have a +1 here, but the +1 is you should never dry fire your weapon, and I don't really. That's not true unless you have an older school like revolver where it's a firing pin,
right? Or rimfire guns,
right? Or rimfire guns. But the +1 that I wanted to address,
all right,
is it kind of continuing on, but it wasn't really like a myth that's that pervasive, but you hear it a lot and it's stupid and it bothers me. This is just sort of, I guess, let's call it the amalgamate of a lot of these other myths that then people become married to, where you'll hear, for example, and this is with the military culture a little bit, say, I carry my gun Israeli style.
Oh, God. Here we go.
Because if it's good enough for the IDF, it's good enough for me. Now, to be clear, Israeli style means carrying a handgun, right? With
empty chamber. And a full magazine.
Meaning, before you get into some kind of an active shooting scenario, you would have to rack that slide. Now, it is technically true that many members of the Israeli military carry this way, but
and many do not, just to be clear.
Right, and many do not. But the reason that it's even permissible in that scenario, just to be clear, is because a lot of people hear IDF. And again, thank you, Jews, for all that you do. And IDF, like, I get it.
Somebody's going to cut that clip. Thank you, Jews, for all that you do.
Thank you, IDF. Badass Jews, we get it. And by the way, the intel that they have is unbelievable, okay?
It is.
A lot of good. But you also have to understand, like we said with MIL-SPEC, meaning a baseline of quality.
Right.
You do have people, it's mandatory, right, to go into the Israeli military. The reason that they have to have someone carried Israeli style with an empty chamber is because it's going to be carried literally by Gal Gadot. Not because it's the most effective way to be ready for an armed conflict, but because you want to make sure that people who have no business being in the military, and I don't know if she could have been a great soldier, I have no idea.
I don't either.
But there are plenty of people who have no business being in the military who do find themselves in the Israeli military. So it's, look, just carry it with an empty chamber and the safety on. You're probably never going to use it anyway, and don't brush your hair with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I obviously carrying it that way is better than not carrying anything. But to assume that you're going to have two hands available in a self-defense situation is an assumption I don't want to make.
Right.
Because it's very possible that you won't.
Right.
So yeah, not a big fan of IDF style. And to your point, it's not recommended because it's good.
Right.
It's kind of recommended because it's just super safe.
Right.
And everyone's afraid of the guy with the gun.
This happens a lot, where people with liability, right? For example, these are other myths that you can make, like, oh, having your firearm, and this depends too, if you get the wrong judge in this country. Was your firearm in a biometric safe? Here's the truth. Biometric, right, fingerprint safes, some of them are far easier to hack and jimmy open than other forms of other safes. And by the way, there's some, I don't know what you call those, where it's different, like a speed, like you kind of have to hit certain things at the same time. It's not biometric, but
no, I know what you're talking about though.
Anyway, there are terms where they're different. It's not a combination safe, but there are all kinds of different safes out there that can be more effective than a biometric safe.
For sure.
But if you get a judge, they'll say, well, you have kids in the house, or do you have a biometric safe? It doesn't mean it's the most effective. You have a lot of these myths that are just pervasive that we, unfortunately, sometimes use as the foundation for law. And people sometimes writing these laws have no idea.
And some states do. Yeah, exactly. Pass laws like that. Unfortunately, California has Safe Storage Act. There's other states that do as well. And I'm not saying you shouldn't keep your firearms in your safe. by all means, everyone's situation is different. Everyone's children are different, etc. But if you have a gun for home defense, you have to be able to access it to defend your home.
Yes.
Right. So, and the quicker you can do it, the better. Somebody kicks your door in, how long do you have to access that gun? Right. So, just keep that in mind. I suppose.
Well, yeah. So I do have one of the biometric. I have several different safes, but one of them is a biometric safe. And I found, and this is I actually showed it.
Yeah,
it would be considered one of the higher end biometric safes.
Right.
It works maybe 60% of the time, and here's the problem: it works almost no % of the time if my finger is sweaty, which is very likely if someone is at the foot of my bed with a balaclava at 3 in the morning.
Odds are good.
Yes, I would imagine there'd be some perspiration.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, biometric safes are sketchy in terms of reliability at this point. Maybe one day, and I'm not sure if you've seen it, but they just recently, I mean, like this month,
smart gun.
Yeah, the first commercially available "quote unquote" smart gun.
Yeah,
we'll see how that works out.
Yeah,
I have my reservations.
You're saying it's more of perhaps a dumb gun.
Yes.
And that's a horrible place, as horrible of a place to end as any. But
so let's do it.
Yes. We hope that this has helped. And by the way, we make all the references, of course, publicly available. You can go back to the catalog this week. Thank you so much to Mr. Gunsngear Mike for coming out. Go check out his YouTube channel, his content on Mug Club. None of this exists without you. So do consider joining up at louderwithcrowder.com/Mug Club, where you get additional content, additional shows, and it allows us to continue creating this kind of information, whether you can find it on YouTube or not. So go back and watch. I think we'll have chapters here: Handguns 101, Long Guns 101, covering rifles and shotguns, ballistics, and then cultural and historical political myths that you might most commonly run into. And hit the like button. I don't really even know. The thing is, this could be running 2 or 3 years from now, where the like button doesn't even exist.
It's entirely possible.
So
they took the dislike away for President Biden.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah. But
the like button's next.
They replaced it with just a double-barreled shotgun aiming at the sky, and you can hit it so they can put you on a watch list. So we'll see you in a little bit. Stay tuned here to this channel next week. Some specials that'll be we'll be installing, and then of course we'll be back with the regular show after this break. Thank you again. If you like this video, click like, consider subscribing, or comment below. And of course, consider tuning in to the live show Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on this channel.